Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. This is continuing with my mini-series about investing in longevity. Really excited for today's guest, Akshay Sanghavi. Akshay, thanks for doing this.
No, my pleasure.
So tell us about your exciting company.
Yes, Yuvan Research has set out for an almost impossible goal. Something that humans have been trying from thousands of years, which is to remain young for hundreds of years, and reverse aging for those who have already become old, and go back to the lovely memories and the physical attributes, mental attributes of when we were younger. So yes, we started with an impossible goal, and then we put some science, a lot of research into it. Got a great team. We have industry leading, what I believe probably is industry leading results so far, at least in the lab. And with rats, old rats, we've been able to make them quite young. In some of the clocks that we measured, more than 50%, at least in 2 clocks. And one of our rats is world record holder now for maximum lifespan. So yeah, we are excited to now move to larger mammals and then humans.
Yeah. So, and tell us the name of the company and the website if people want to check it out.
Yeah, we are still in stealth mode, so you won't get to check out too much, except for the news articles that are out. But yeah, website would be yuvres.com, and company's name is Yuvan Research.
And will you spill out that URL for people?
Yes, it's www.yuvres.com.
Great. And can you tell us about some of the backgrounds of the people who are working on this with you?
Yeah, so I reached out when I thought that I'd done sufficient research on this, and I started because of personal reasons, and about 5 years ago, I thought I'd reached a point where I wanted to do something about it, and I came across a research paper on parabiosis by the Conboys, and then which is now really famous. And then I read a paper on heterochronic plasma exchange, and just the fact that plasmapheresis is something that is done like millions of times already very safely as a procedure, and all we had to do, which was spelled out in the paper, was do young for old. Young plasma into old, and so yeah, that was the starting point. I reached out to.
Well, and can I jump in there for 1 second? So, the longevity industry is unfortunately full of a bunch of exaggerators and people who claim things that are proven that aren't quite proven yet. And there's obviously the big piece in the Wall Street Journal on Sunday about David Sinclair, and and it's been this way for hundreds of years. Somebody shows up to the King of Spain with the "I've got the elixir of youth" or whatever, right? But then there are the folks that are like, turning stuff that sounds like science fiction into science, and it is proven and it is peer reviewed and things like this. And for people who aren't as nerdy about this stuff as me, one of the things that you will see a lot of places is what Akshay is talking about, where they took, and I want you to fact check me on this, okay? But they took 2 rats, one that was old and one that was young, and surgically tied their bloodstreams together. Is that right?
That was parabiosis, yes. That's what started the whole thing.
Yeah,
yes.
this famous parabiosis study. And they've got all these photos, and you can literally watch the old rat get young. Now, unfortunately, because they hooked them together, the young rat got old, and obviously not in chronological years, but in the what's called biological clocks, right?
Yes.
And so why don't we go into just a couple more details on that, and then dive back into your company. So, what do you remember what year that was when that got announced?
At least 10 years, I think. 10 years, yeah.
Yeah, and the old rat was like decrepit and graying and had a curved spine and actually a whole bunch of things that humans have when they get old, right?
Yeah, actually, what the convoys did was probably in mice.
Oh,
But
sorry.
but yeah, all of that applies. Whatever you said. I mean, the old mice became younger and the young mice became older.
And they could just measure all these things about it. And so this
Yes,
idea of, you know, how is it, like obviously there's something in the blood. Like what is it in the blood that is, both making the young mouse old and making the older mouse, restore its health to what it would have looked like as a younger mouse, right?
yes.
Um, and so picking up from there, can you tell me the other people that you're working on this with? What are their backgrounds? Where did they go to school? Some of these things.
Yeah, so my co-founder was Harold Catcher, and he was a professor at University of Maryland. Uh, he's no longer my co-founder as of recently, but he and I started this. Then we have a PI, Kavita Singh. She had worked with Pfizer earlier in drug development, and she was assistant professor in pharmaceutics. So we had a small team, but a very dedicated team. We were passionate. We wanted to, uh, go after something that was really challenging, and we probably got a little lucky as well. So, uh, and we started on a solid base, because those results are like now part of legend, parabiosis, and so there was some underlying facts that were already established about young plasma, and so we worked, further on it. And yeah, I mean, then we also got similar results, but we evolved that process further, and I also have tried to find out what is the constituents in the young plasma that were, so that we can concentrate those and make them more potent.
Yeah. It's funny, 20 something years ago when I was at college, you could donate plasma for money.
Yes.
And they did this funny marketing thing where they only paid in $2 bills. So they'd order all
Oh,
these $2 bills. So around town, like if you ever saw a kid with $2 bills, they were donating plasma. It was like a positive peer pressure thing, right?
right,
But they obviously hadn't caught on to the possibility of what plasma for 20-year-olds could do. Um,
right.
and my understanding is that you guys are not pumping the old blood back into the young animals and making them age. Can you explain
No.
the difference there?
Yes. No, that was not necessary. I mean, and it's not necessary. So as long as one can harvest the constituents from the young plasma and, and of course, purify it in a lab and make it ready for injection, then one could do that procedure without having to, sew up young person to the old one. But
Yeah, we want to
yeah,
have the
I
older.
mean,
We want to help older animals or older people become much more healthy without making young people get less healthy, right?
yeah. So yes, that as I said, I mean, you need not, deteriorate the age of the young donors. They could continue, and blood donation is actually considered healthy now, and a lot of people give that to get rid of some of the old stuff that keeps gathering in us, and so yeah, it's all very fascinating, and the results are pretty promising. So see further how this goes.
Yeah. So again, I I get like the disadvantage of not having a PhD in any type of biology, right? But I get the advantage of like a beginner's mind in this world. And for me, I had this great venture capitalist on the show last week, and he'd worked at a 14 for doing venture investing for this $34 billion family, the Pritzkers, and got him into like Facebook and DoorDash and all these like multi-billion-dollar success stories, right? And now he's at a $14 billion family, the Crown family. He works with them and has his own. And he's like the nicest venture capitalist I've ever met. Okay. And he was saying to me, like, hey, Jess, your job is not to become the world's best geneticist. Your job is to find the world's best geneticist. Right.
Nice.
So it like took a lot of pressure off. So I think about, this study is obviously so famous, has been through peer review. You can literally like watch look at the progression of the photos and see this decrepit old mouse, appear to become very healthy, right? And then there's a whole bunch of people who, whether it's their excitement runs away with them or whatever motivation, maybe they just they feel convinced, and so they don't feel the need to like get something all the way through FDA testing before they announce they've conquered everything. I think for me and my friends who are just fascinated with this space, like you look at the preventative medicine, preventative diabetes medicine, Ozempic, and like the market cap of the company goes up by hundreds of billions, right? And then like
Yes.
that's a lot of investors' attention, right?
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so there's such a fascination with the space. Besides people like their own biohacking of like, how can I live longer? It's wow, there's going to be a lot of money made because there's a lot of people that would love to have extra healthy years on Earth, right?
Yes.
So I'm interested for you. Um, do you want to talk about your personal reasons? You don't have to of getting into the field, or should we skip
No,
it?
I'm happy to.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
happy to. Basically, it's something that probably touches everyone's lives at some point. We love our parents, we love our grandparents, and death is not a nice thing. I mean, people when they die, you don't uh, get to love them, meet them, have your uh, happy memories with them. Suddenly, they're gone forever. And so, my mother, she had type 2 diabetes, and complications from that resulted in a stroke, which made her paralyzed for half of her body, and for 7 years. And it was very, very traumatic for her. Obviously, she was really, really sad, and also the family. And it made me kind of angry in the beginning, but then later on, it made me pivot my biggest skill set that I used to use in my career, which was research, and pivot that, at least in the beginning, offline, when I had free time, into research on type 2 diabetes, on aging. I really pretty much figured out very soon in the first 2 years of my research that, rather than focusing on a particular disease of aging, maybe it may be more efficient to focus on aging itself. Yeah, that's how I got into this research, and this was 12 years ago. And yeah, now I'm like at a point where I'm excited with the possibility, that it might happen in our lifetime. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it needs to follow the rigor of drug development process and all the regulatory approvals. It needs to, rather than just winning brownie points by doing publications, it needs to follow a path that most of the drugs that are approved does, with all the discipline and all of that. And I agree. I mean, exaggerated statements that disappoint people later is something that has given a bad name to longevity science to some extent. So, some of the companies that come out and eventually succeed in getting regulatory approval and come out with drugs that do benefit people will change that mindset and get people really excited. Everyone is wanting to, contemplate on such a amazing possibility, but everyone is skeptical right now on whether actually it can happen. So some of the successes would probably make us, start to believe that yes, we can actually remain young, become young.
Well, first of all, I remember the first time you told me this story, and it's no different today. I'm sorry to hear about your mother. My grandpa, my mom's dad, was like a second father to me. I lived like four doors down from him, and unfortunately had type 2 diabetes as well, and it led to other complications and him passing. So it's never fun. Um, I I think as you talk about that, well, let's start with tell us about your previous background before coming to the longevity biotech world.
Yeah, no, previously I was in investment banking, so completely different field. I was also a co-founder in a fund that I set up for the company I was working with in Singapore, $100 million fund. But it was in media and communications. So yeah, it was. I used to consult with really large U.S. companies, helping them set up business in India. So before that, but all of these jobs required very high quality research. Whether it was investing through the fund or you know helping companies establish business. So so yeah, that, and then I was involved in a startup, and we for about 5 years we grew it 600% in those 5 years, and I exited. Uh, and then that was around the time when I thought the research had reached a point where I want to do something about aging, which was always running on the back from the last 12 years. I did a lot of education while I had a daytime job, on the weekends and at night. I started doing courses on whatever gaps I found in my understanding from online universities. So these online uh, courses that I've opened up are really helpful. Earlier, that was not an option, but now there's almost everything available, whatever you want to learn on. Uh, so that helped a lot, and yeah, now I think I am getting more and more understanding on the biology of aging. Uh, I love to research almost every day, even now, because there's so much more to still learn.
Yeah. Um, I think what I'm encouraged about, I remember it was fun, like, randomly connecting off LinkedIn, getting to know each other a little, having a call. And I think one of the things that I'm encouraged by is folks who don't come out of academia and maybe didn't come out of a biotech fund who have overcome the odds. I mean, statistically, that makes up so much of the industry, people who followed the regular path. And yet, when you look at the biggest outliers in an industry, it typically comes from outsiders. And so,
Yeah,
like, it's like being an outsider, not having the PhD or not being the medical doctor. It's like it's more likely to push you to either side of the bell curve. Either probably doing a lot worse, or potentially better. But as opposed to like looking the part, doing the right thing, getting the right degree, interning at the right place, becoming middle manager at the right place, becoming senior manager at the right place, right? So I'm interested for yourself as you've worked to, not be a statistic on the low end of the bell curve, right? And wanting to be an outlier on the top end of the bell curve. Um, how have you approached the science and the credibility and the fact that there are people with really fancy degrees from really fancy places who worked at big biotech companies who are wrong? And like, as you have come, as an outsider from the industry, can you give us some of the tips that have helped you make your decisions about who you're willing to partner with, who you're willing to hire, who you're willing to trust?
yeah. So no, I made up for some of that by hiring people who actually had the PhDs and the backgrounds.
But I want to start
Uh,
there because, you know, maybe it's a slander job by the Wall Street Journal, okay? But you look at the
right.
David Sinclair article in the Wall Street Journal. He's he's a Harvard professor. He's made sold the one company, I want to say, for 760 million. He's got 50 patents, best-selling author. He's on all these podcasts, you know, Andrew Huberman and all these different people, and then by a whole bunch of people who are geroscientists and longevity experts. They're really giving him the gears right now about saying that he's making claims that uh, you know have not actually been proven, and then selling stuff based on unproven claims, and really giving the gears right now to that guy, right? And so
Right.
when you're deciding which PhDs to hire, what was that decision tree like for you? Because here's this guy, famous PhD guy from Harvard, and
Yes.
now it appears that some of the things that he's tweeted or stuff weren't 100% accurate.
So for me, it wasn't the degree itself, but their published articles, like their research papers, and what was the thinking. I wanted to see the thinking, and in my case, the thinking really kind of matched. So so there are two schools in aging. One is programmed aging, and people who believe that it's all random and stochastic. The damage that we get. Uh, but yeah, so that itself was very important for me. That someone from believing that it's programmed is someone that I collaborate with. And then I also wanted to see the skill sets because our PI actually did drug development work with a big pharma, so that kind of discipline and skill sets are already there because those are required as well. You know, but what an outsider brings is a 360-degree openness. There is no bias from your own thesis of PhD, what you did, or later. There is a kind of a tunneling that happens where there is incredible level of expertise that keeps rising, but it keeps rising within that funnel. So someone from outside the field is not burdened by that. And that allows them to research on any topic and get a 360-degree view on a particular problem they want to solve. So yeah, I guess that sort of helps to some extent, I think, but then it also needs to be tempered with team members that have the relevant skill sets in the lab for the.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the things that are not in stealth mode. What are some of the, whether it's papers you guys have published or news announcements that you put out?
Yeah, we published a paper last year, latter part of last year in Geroscience, which was peer reviewed, and it gives a lot of
What's the name
information
of it?
about uh, the paper itself. Yeah, it's basically called about uh, cross species. So in this paper, we demonstrate about cross species, where we talk about we us extracting exosomes and EVs and their cargo from porcine plasma and injecting it into old rats. So this was not extracted from young rats, which was what was done in parabiosis, for example, between mice. But this was extracted in young pigs, from their plasma. And yeah, so that paper demonstrated that these molecules that we want to transfer to the young, I mean to the old, they are highly conserved, so across mammals. So and they do the same job, like RNAs and non-coding RNAs, and these are all regulated molecules. But that was fascinating finding, and we wanted to share that with the world. So so that's why yeah, we were excited by that. Our first author was Professor Steve Horvath, who developed some of these very accurate clocks that can measure biological age.
Can
So
we talk about that for a second? Because there's obviously none of the clocks are perfect yet, and even the people who've invented some of the clocks say, oh, you should really do multiple clocks, right, to get a version. But for people who don't know what the Horvath clock is, can you give us just a quick overview?
yeah, he's also a bioinformatician. So what he did was fascinating. He measured or recorded changes. He created an algorithm that actually recorded changes in CPG island, methylation in CPG islands. Basically, these are epigenetic changes that he measured, uh, uh, and
Can we can we
the
pause for 1 second? Because 2 months ago, I didn't know what epigenetics was. I didn't know what the
right,
epigenome is, and so
right,
can I give my bad example and then you correct me?
yeah, sure.
So
No, so
epi-
yeah, go
to
ahead.
me,
Sorry, go
when I
ahead.
think about the epigenome, it's like, hey, listen, we've all got our DNA. We got we've got our genes of what's possible. Maybe half from your mom, half from your dad, but they don't all get turned on. And there's this thing that sits above the genome called the epigenome. And so epigenomics is it's like the soft, like if the DNA is the hardware, the epigenome is the software. And it says okay, turn this one on the DNA, turn this one off on the DNA. And that what's fascinating is depending on your circumstances, are you in the middle of, are you in the middle of a war and your town is getting bombed for years, right? The epigenome, like your software will turn different things on and off from your DNA. And that's why twins can end up different because they have different life experiences. Um, and that there's a lot of great science in understanding how the epigenome is programming what DNA gets turned on and off and how that can affect how many healthy years you have on life. That's a very non-technical answer. Is there anything you want to add to that or correct me
No,
on?
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly what it does. uh, all the cells, we're a collection of cells, and all the cells have exactly the same DNA. So then why does one cell become an eye, or one cell become a part of a hand, or whatever? It's the epigenome, it's the epigenetic marks that actually change the configuration of the functions and all of that of the cells. So no, absolutely. Yeah, so he measures one particular type of epigenetic change that occurs over a lifetime. And the fascinating part is that it's so predictable, these changes, that he could actually make a clock out of those, measuring those changes. So, yeah, he was, I think, the pioneer in this.
And can I ask about that? Is the clock basically they've measured all these people's hearts and they say, hey, typically a person of this biological age gets this type of reading. If you're, I'm 44, right? So it's the way they're saying is this is what I don't understand yet. And really a point of this show is how can we translate what all you smart people do to what me and my friends can understand, right? Is it that
Right.
it's going through saying, hey, the epigenome is normally like this at 40 and like this at 50, and so because they've taken it across a whole bunch of people, and so when they measure mine, they're like, Jess, yours is closer to what people who usually 50 have, or yours is closer to what people who are 40 usually have, and that's how he's like, oh, your biological age of your, I don't know, heart is further than your chronological age, how many years you've been on Earth. Is that close, or am I totally out to lunch there?
No, that's close. I mean, you're right. So that's what it does. It'll give you from the measurements that it does from any DNA sample from you, it'll be able to tell you what should be your biological age.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. So you write this paper. It's Steve Horvath,
Steve Horvath, yes.
inventor of the Horvath clock. So you write this paper with him, and you're taking, is it plasma from the young pigs that you're putting into old rats?
It's constituents of the plasma,
Okay.
not the entire plasma,
Okay.
but constituents of the plasma that we uh, you removed and concentrated.
And what was the effect in the older rats?
They became significantly younger on two clocks we that we measured, and even 30 biomarkers that we tested, including some functional ones like grip strength, which is for the muscles, and memory test, Barnes Maze, which is for the memory.
Hold on. How do you measure
But
the grip strength on a rat with those
there
tiny
is there
hands?
is a way to do it. Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's a simple device on which they cling, and you measure till they cling. But But yeah, I mean, these results are still in a much smaller mammal. So while we are excited, we have to be cautious, and we have to wait till these results can be replicated in some larger mammals. I think that's when it will really start getting exciting. So, unfortunately, many results that have occurred earlier in mice, for example, have not translated to humans. So that's the reason why we need to, get excited only when we see some, translation happening in larger mammals.
And for this paper, when something gets peer reviewed, what's that process? How long does that take?
Oh, yeah, peer review can be painful. So it does take at least a couple of months, sometimes 6 months, maybe more. It depends on, how many comments and you get from your reviewers,
And
and
does the
then
publication pick the reviewers? Or are these people you know? How does that work?
no, the publication picks the reviewers.
Okay.
So no, we never get access to them. There's always the editor and the team of the journal. So first you have to cross that. You have to cross the editorial approval, where the editor will say yes or no, whether it's a good fit for their journal, or whether they are sufficiently confident about your science. And once you cross that, then they start the process. They already have some peers that are signed up with their publication, and then they go through this review process. We get a whole bunch of comments. Some of them are very useful. So uh, that does help to improve the publication,
What's
but
an
it's a very
example?
rigorous.
What's an example of
Sorry,
a what's an example of an unhelpful comment versus a useful comment?
I don't want to get into trouble with the reviewers, but yeah, sometimes a reviewer will put a comment that came out from not fully understanding something. So, for example, they will say that, why did you only mention about neurological markers and not about other markers? But the fact was that neurological markers was only, say, 10% of what we presented, and 90% was all the other markers. So then we have to point them out that in this section, all of this is mentioned, and then they would get satisfied about that once they realize that yes, it is being covered. And useful would be someone saying that, for example, you have provided this evidence, but why don't you also provide one more evidence that confirms your theory, or your thesis? So so you end up thinking, oh yeah, I should have thought of that. I mean, why don't I also do this, and this will make the results more solid. So yeah, it's a process that goes back and forth for, I mean, a couple of months at least. But in the end, I guess it does help to improve the publication.
Yeah.
So it's all worth it.
Um, and just for one more time, what were the results of the constituents from the young pig plasma in the
Yeah.
rats?
So in this particular paper, Steve Horvath and his lab, they measured it one way, and they found 54% reversal, average reversal in the biological age of the treated rats. And then they measured, used that data and added it to the overall calculations. And the final result they got was 67.4% average reversal in the biological age of the treated rats. So yeah, exciting. And then in this paper, we also measured with another clock because it's important to be able to repeat your results. So we measured with the glycan age rat clock, and in that also we saw greater than 50% reversal in biological age. And both those clocks actually measure very different things. So we already discussed what Steve's clocks measure. In glycan age, they measure changes on glycans, on IgG molecules that circulate in our blood.
What
So
yeah, what is a glycan in your blood?
glycan is like a type of a sugar filament that is there uh, on the surface of a lot of our part of our body. So inside. So uh, they have they have not been studied as much as they should, and I'm personally very grateful to Professor Gordon Locke, who's been one of the pioneers. So we had the opportunity to work with two pioneers, Steve Horvath and Gordon Locke, and he opened up this world of glycan biology to all of us. And it's fascinating how you know they all change in sync. So even the changes that we see on the glycans, he can actually create. I mean, he could create a clock out of it. So there are all these sets of predictable changes that occur in us as we keep growing older.
Yeah, it's exciting. So, um, and where is Steve Harbath based, and where is Dr. Glock based?
Steve Horvath is now based. I mean, he used to be based out of LA because he was a professor of genetics at UCLA. But now he's based out of UK. Uh, he's joined a company called Altos Labs,
Oh yeah.
and yes, so he's working in their, I think, Cambridge lab.
Um, Altos has raised didn't they raise like 3 billion from like Jeff Bezos and a bunch of people?
Yes, that's what all of us have read. We don't know what is the actual number. Only someone company insider can tell us. But yeah, they have the relevant background. The founders, they have the relevant background to be able to raise a lot of money at the seed stage itself, and so yeah, they have that, uh, and that helps because then you uh, typically a founder ends up spending half their time raising money, maybe more, rather than focusing on the science. But if you have that advantage of having raised a wall of money up front, then you can totally focus on the science.
Yeah, it's interesting the legitimacy. Like even though people in society love to rip on billionaires lately, um, there is this like legitimacy though when you see, objectively successful business people choosing to put a lot of money behind things like this. It's kind of like one of those base signals to people who aren't familiar with the science and stuff. That's like, oh wow, so somebody who has made wise choices elsewhere uh, thinks this is worth putting a lot of money into, right? And plus, um, it gets a lot of like the rest of the world to have heard, like, oh, real scientists are making real progress, right? Because they
Yes.
want to cover anything Jeff Bezos did, and so this covers it, right? I'm just in the middle of a book of somebody who I want to say studied in Horvath's lab, who went over to Altos as well. Have you heard of this book by Dr. Morgan Levine called True Age?
I've heard of Morgan Levine for sure, and but haven't had the chance to read that book yet.
I'm about halfway through. It's interesting. It's like that's how I'm learning about this stuff. Got to get her on the podcast. I got to get all these people on the podcast. So let's talk about fundraising. Let's talk about less the biotech mafia, right? Let's talk about people who don't come from a biotech background, but maybe it's a situation like you and I, where they have a family member they're so close to that passed away from, complications due to type 2 diabetes or whatever it is, and they decide like, no, this matters. This is what I care about. I'm going to spend time on this. I want to be part of the reason that this stuff moves. Do we get past the hype and the quacks to like real science that can be verified by the FDA, right? Um, what's it like talking to those people? How are their questions different than the traditional biotech VCs or the other people in the biotech mafia? How are their questions different?
Uh, so I mean, they want to de-risk their investment as much as possible, right? So I wouldn't blame them for not being very comfortable with CEOs coming from not coming from the background that they want, uh, which for them is a risk factor. So I mean, the solution that I'm working on as a founder is to hire a team, that has like, so I move to another role and someone else takes the role of the CEO, who has taken a drug all the way from lab to the market. And so that's how you kind of solve that problem. But in the end, it benefits the company and it benefits the science. And if I am the shareholder as a founder, it also benefits me. So these are all wise counsel. Main thing is the science needs to be solid. One can hire the best possible team, but if there is no science, there is no idea on that is translatable. Then there are companies that have spent billions of dollars over a decade and come out with no product in the market. So all of that needs to come into together. The right team, the right science, uh, and then I guess something wonderful can happen when an investor looks at it from the years and years of experience. They know what has worked, what has not worked. They've actually been in the front line, taking bullets. So most of the companies don't work out, as people know. It's only a few that work out that pays off for everything else. So they have that experience and they use that to take all these decisions. I think there is a lot of money. It's not like people. Last year was a very difficult year for fundraising because the exits had stopped and you know uh, the investors were anxious. But that still didn't stop a lot of deals happening. So if you have a compelling story, if you have a compelling science, compelling team, money will find you. It's both ways, but there is a bit of a struggle, especially from someone not coming from the right background, and then we have some extra like handicap. We have some additional convincing to do,
Yeah.
to get the investors comfortable.
And where are you based now?
I'm based out of Bay Area in near San Francisco.
Okay, great. And are you guys disclosing how much you've raised already?
Yeah, yeah, we've raised over 6 million.
Okay. Um, what's another question? What's another question that somebody who hasn't traditionally been a biotech health investor, that when they're talking to you, they're excited, but what's another question that you have to deal with?
From investors.
Yeah, from investors who are outside biotech, who are thinking about coming in with you.
Uh, Outside biotech, typically investors, I don't find, unless it's like a angel investor with their
Yeah,
personal money.
yeah. Let's talk
Yeah.
angel investors.
Yes.
What's a question an angel investor asks you?
Typically, they'll want to understand the science a little bit in layman's terms, uh, and they have already done some homework. So when you're talking to them, they would understand most of what you're saying, and they will have very relevant questions. They have not become that wealthy for nothing. So they are smart people. Uh, yeah. So
What's an example of a relevant question?
uh, they'll, for example, say that they'll have some statistic, like they'll say 70% of the data that comes out from mice and rat does not successfully translate. to humans. So what do you have to say for that? And you have to convince them that we found this cross species experiment where we found how highly conserved these molecules are, and that increases the chances of success in larger mammals, including humans. Because if it's so highly conserved, it should work on all mammals, and that's how you try to uh, justify your thesis with data that kind of supports it. That still does not mean they will agree with you because they'll make their own conclusions. But yeah, these are smart people. So
Yeah. By the way, how much do those tests cost? Like, how much is like, how much would a study just in mice versus now you're at it, with the young pigs and the rat? What do those cost and how long does that take?
yeah, those costs would be hundreds of thousands. It runs in hundreds of thousands, and uh, so a lifespan study that we did that took us at least more than 2 years to complete. But if it is not a lifespan study, then it would typically, the whole cycle can be as small as 3 months. So between those ranges.
Yeah. When you think about switching gears maybe a little, when you think about specifically geroscience and longevity research, there's obviously the San Diego's and to some extent LA and Boston. Um, it does feel like there is a higher concentration. I mean, biotech is quite spread, but it seems like a lot of the longevity biotech is maybe a little extra concentrated in the Bay Area. Do you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
No, I agree. I mean, Bay Area is a fascinating place, probably in the whole planet, because it makes the highest number of cowboy investments, in the world. I mean, people take risks here. Really smart, intelligent venture capitalists. But Bay Area has I think some of the most interesting companies, uh, get born here, and that's because of this high risk capacity, appetite here. So yeah, and it's there are so many founders here, thousands and thousands, and so there is also a lot of fraternization. I mean, inspire each other, and so it's a fascinating community.
Yeah. Um, when you think about this idea of high risk investments, right? Like I love Nicholas Taleb. I don't know if you know his book, like Black Swan or
Yes, of
Anti-Fragile
course.
stuff, right?
Yes.
And like his concept of like barbell investing, like put a ton of your money into like Warren Buffett compound interest, low debt real estate, I don't know, like index fund, Vanguard index fund or something, right? And like real good safety of principal kind of stuff. And then don't do anything in the middle of like medium risk, medium return, because then you get the worst of both worlds. But then like far on the other end, maybe you put a little bit into the like, hey, this probably isn't going to pan out. But if it does, it's going to like, it could, I don't know, double your whole net worth, even though you put 1% in or something, right? Um, so within this, like the far end of the barbell of like, hey, you got some gambling money, like why don't you come try this one? Um,
Yeah.
there are the Sequoias of the world, or these people who it is in their circle of competence on making these type of bets, knowing most of them aren't going to work out, but still having a high enough probability of ones that do, that it's obviously made many of those people into multi-billionaires. Um, when you think about talking to investors from or angels, from outside biotech, outside venture, and you've got this idea of like, hey, you're not their financial planner, you don't have like fiduciary responsibility, but like you want to be a good human, right? So this idea of like you're trying to raise as much as you can for what you need to do, but you're also trying to have this great relationship with somebody else of saying, hey, listen, like you got to diversify your own portfolio. Like if you're going to make these kind of bets, like the people who are the best in the world at this, the Kleiner Perkins, the Sequoias of the world, they they do several. They don't put it all on red, right? I'm interested how you would talk to angels, how you would talk to non-biotech, non-venture investors on saying like, of course I want you to put it along with me. And I want you to be a smart human being and recognize like you're going to have to diversify yourself. Like I believe in this wholeheartedly and I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future.
Yeah.
How do you think about weaving between those two?
Yeah, no, in angel investors, there are both the kinds. So there are angel investors that are very prolific. So they literally do the same strategy as a VC would do, but probably with a different check size. But yeah, they make a lot of bets, and then some of them work out. But there are also, especially in geroscience or longevity science, there are also these angels that are not necessarily doing this for only commercial benefit, or and not they are not hardcore angel investors, but they are doing this because of personal reasons, like you and me, what we experienced, and they're doing this for their family members or whoever they're worried about. So I come across both kind of investors. Yeah.
And those ones are willing to put a little bit bigger chunk being less diversified because
Yes.
it's kind of like they believe in the cause so much it's not purely an investment decision.
Yes.
No, that's
Yes.
an interesting observation. It's funny, I've been calling a bunch of people off the podcast who, built $1.5 billion company and we're talking about this and they start telling me about their biohacking, oh, I'm doing this and
Yeah.
I'm talking to them about some of the financial upside that some others are seeing. And they're like, oh, that's great, great. But I also just want to I just want to help society get past the sickness care system. And it's like
Yes.
kind of a cause for them to I just think all humans, like this is great for every family, for grandma and grandpa to be able to go to their grandkids' wedding or
Yes.
graduation or something.
Absolutely. Have you got Brian Johnson on your podcast yet?
Yeah, yeah, it was super fun. My
Yeah. Yeah.
my Dr. Greg Bailey and I co-hosted that, and
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
lucky enough to meet him in person,
Yeah.
and it was so different than a lot of the hype online, and the guy attracts so much negativity.
Yeah.
But then when you meet him, you're like, oh yeah, he's a little intense, and I
Yeah.
don't agree with everything he says, but there's a whole bunch of the nuance that I feel like the mainstream media gets wrong about him. I actually have a lot of
Yes.
respect for him being willing to
Yes.
be a human guinea pig and him being willing to pursue this in the face of so much criticism and uh, not just cave to the criticism. And so
Yes.
again, I can't it's just like check mark. Well, Brian Johnson said do it, but man, I it was actually pretty inspiring to both meet with him in person and then invite him on the show afterwards and have that discussion.
No, I totally admire him as well. So I think what he's doing is amazing. In fact, I had a chat with him once, and I suggested to him that why don't you go public with all your data, because it'll inspire other people. But then I now seem to think that, I mean, that also exposed him to all this criticism for some reason or the other. But yeah, one has to look at all the positive things that he's, sharing
Yeah, and he
without
makes some
any personal agenda.
yeah, and he makes some pretty he makes some pretty significant claims that are not peer reviewed or FDA tested, right? And like he can be I find some of his opinions, but you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Like I get to pick and choose what things about him I admire or what things I agree with or not. And it's kind of a little bit
Yeah.
the aim of the show and like our longevity investment club, where we're like, it's kind of for people like me who maybe we have investment experience. We've had some successes in life. We're interested in this space, but we're not a PhD. And like, I really see my job as like, how can I get smart people to like, they've got knowledge at like level 10 and they bring it down to a level 6 to try to explain it to people. And I'm like, how do we get it between like a level 1 and a level 2 so that people completely outside the industry can go like, can start to get a feel for it instead of it just feeling like this big black box and, 6-syllable words that nobody knows what they mean. Let's do by the way, if people want to connect with you, is LinkedIn the best way?
Yeah. I mean, although, as a founder, I hardly have time for anything else. But yeah, that would be
Like if they want to follow
okay.
you, is Twitter better? Is LinkedIn better if they want to follow you?
LinkedIn.
Okay. Please spell your name for people.
Yeah, it's Akshay and Sanghavi is Sanghavi.
Great.
But on LinkedIn, I'm Akshay S. So they should look for Akshay S.
Okay. Then give us the company website again.
Yes, it's yuvres.com.
Great. Well, listen, I enjoyed our previous conversation. Thanks for coming on the show and telling us your experience, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
You bet. Okay, bye everyone.